Lara Adler, welcome to Women's Wellness Radio.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get a little nerdy with you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you as always. I will share, I'm a late blooming student in your course. One of your courses on environmental toxins, it officially ended a while ago. I'm still taking it.
It's all good, girl.
But I've been totally enjoying it, learning about toxins in plastics and makeup and fish, and it's been completely wonderful for me, and I'm excited to share some little bits of that today. And then in relation to a topic that many women struggle with, which is maintaining a healthy body weight. And I think this topic of toxins affecting your weight is just not at all talked about enough. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's starting to be something that people are discussing more, but the dialogue around weight loss, it has really hinged on this concept of calories in, calories out, meaning that we have to burn more calories than we take in order to achieve weight loss. And we do that either by eating less food and or exercising more. And so that's where the conversation around weight loss has consistently always hinged on this diet and exercise. And I think that we're starting to recognize that doesn't work, right? Because we have so many people that are continuing to struggle with weight gain and the metabolic conditions that are sort of a result of having excess weight and the health issues that are resulting from that. And so we're seeing that even though we know about good diet and exercise, not to say that just because we know about it, everybody does them, because we certainly know that's not true. But people are starting to recognize that that on its own isn't working. And so I think that there is a very sort of slow and incremental shift in the awareness around how other things might be playing into people's struggles with weight gain. And that's really where chemicals put in, sort of slide into this conversation. And that's not to say, we don't want to say that diet and exercise are not related, because obviously they're hugely related, but we don't want to neglect looking at the role that chemicals can play in contributing to this issue. And so if we're only looking at, say, two of the factors of a multi-factored storm, let's say, of things that are causing weight gain, then it makes sense that we're not really ever going to get to the place where we want as a society in terms of tackling this weight problem, right? If we're only sort of looking at a couple of facets of this conversation and not addressing the others. And that's sort of my goal, is to get people to understand what are the things in their environment that might be contributing to that. In a lot of cases, we won't know for sure, but, in the realm of the conversation around environmental chemicals, which is a big one, and it's often scary and overwhelming, I really think that we need to look at it through the lens of the precautionary principle, the better safe than sorry. If there's indication of potential harm, then let's move to reduce our exposures. And in some cases, there is very clear evidence that there is harm. So we should move to do the same thing, as to reduce our exposures. So, it's exciting to see the conversation spread, but yes, it's not talked about enough.
Yeah, and kind of what I see is, calories in, calories out is more people are being aware, but now they're focusing on food quality, which I think is great. And reduces food is one way that we're exposed to chemicals. So that's good. And people are sometimes changing their ratio carbs to proteins and that kind of thing. And then I see them sometimes, reducing plastics or reducing, artificial cleaning sprays, just kind of out of a vague knowledge that those are bad for you. But maybe not having a clear link on how those could affect your weight. So that's something that we're going to dig into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, this concept, a lot of people the concept feels very abstract, right? Like, what does our shampoo have to do with like the fact that I'm overweight? So a lot of people are just like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So that couldn't possibly be a real thing. Like, those things have nothing to do with each other. And so there is this sort of air of feeling sort of incredulous about like, it's not possible that these things are connected. But if we look at this issue through a slightly different lens, we actually can see that we already know this is an issue. And so the lens that I use as an example to illustrate this is pharmaceuticals. So we all know, it's common knowledge, that there are certain pharmaceuticals that have a side effect of weight gain. Most people either know somebody who's experienced weight gain as a side effect of being put on some pharmaceutical, or they've experienced it themselves. And somebody can be of normal, healthy weight, ideal weight for their body. They get put on an antidepressant or an antipsychotic or something like that, or a Nexium or a Prevacid, right? These are medications that can trigger weight gain in people. And then, in a few short months, they can find themselves putting on 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds, and they might spend the rest of their life trying to get that off. So that's pretty common. And I've just heard countless stories of clients and just people within my audience who, when I share that sort of insight into, we already know this is a thing, right? We're not questioning whether or not it's real because we know it's real. I inevitably get, a dozen people who say, yeah, that happened to me. I was fine, and then I got put on this medication, and now I'm like 30 pounds overweight. And I've never been overweight at any point in my life. And now I am, and I can't undo it.
Oh,
and
wow.
So that's like a recognized side effects. It'll say it on that sort of paper insert that we see inside the boxes and packages of some of these medications. It's a known side effect. And so those medications that trigger that, and what's happening there, it's referred to as chemically induced weight gain. Right? So we already know that certain chemicals, the kinds in this instance that are used in some of these pharmaceuticals, can cause weight gain.
Okay. This is so interesting because I've known, some people will say I'm on an antidepressant, but I gained weight, so I wanted to get off. But I never really thought about why, like what was going on. Was it change their appetite, or like what happened?
Well,
what is going on?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on, and not all of the mechanisms of actions are totally understood in terms of being able to identify, this is exactly what happens. But in some of these instances, what happens is these pharmaceutical medications activate something in the body called the PPAR gamma receptor. And the PPAR gamma is the sort of primary regulator of fat cells in our body. And so when this PPAR gamma is activated, which is what happens through some of these pharmaceutical medications, the body starts giving marching orders to our cells. And it does it in one of two ways. One, it either says to our stem cells, so those new cells that are being created in our body, if it's a cell is in pre-development and that PPAR gamma gets activated, the body is going to tell that baby cell to be a fat cell instead of like a skin cell or an eyeball cell or whatever, right? And so what that does is it increases the overall quantity of fat cells in the body, and that in and of itself can be part of weight gain.
That's
right?
bad.
It's not good. So the other way that the activation of PPAR affects weight gain is that if a fat cell is already in existence, and we all already have fat cells, when you activate PPAR, it gives that particular fat cell the ability to hold more fat inside of it, so that you have physically larger fat cells. So activation of this receptor can kind of be this double whammy, where not only do you have more fat cells in terms of quantity, but the size of those fat cells can get larger. And so that's the method of action through a lot of these pharmaceutical medications, is they're activating PPAR.
This makes a lot of sense. So if someone, like you said, if people get off, they still can't lose the weight. Well, they've taken away the new introduction of chemical, but the
Right.
chemical
But you
also
still have
came
these
back.
fat cells.
Yeah, you have the cells, and as we'll maybe talk about later, toxins are stored in fat cells,
Yes.
so that
Yeah.
medication can still be hanging out.
Hanging around. Right. And so, we already recognize this as fact. This isn't debatable that weight gain is the side effect of medications. So all that we need to do then is sort of pivot our attention just a little bit and look at the other kinds of chemicals that we're being exposed to that aren't in our pharmaceuticals, that are perhaps in the products that we're buying and using every day. Like you had mentioned, the household cleaners and our personal care products and our furniture and our clothing and our, the scented candles, the air fresheners, the plugins, Febreze, all of those items. It's not a stretch or a leap for us to question whether or not, might some of those chemicals also have the ability to affect our body in a way that can lead to weight gain in the same way that we recognize that those other chemicals can, meaning pharmaceuticals. And so there is this sort of body of research that's looking at environmental triggers to metabolic disease and obesity, and the chemicals that the researchers are finding are associated with this are termed obesogens. There's a whole class of chemicals that are classified if they exhibit the type of qualities or properties that can trigger weight gain. They get lumped into this class of chemicals called obesogens, which are chemicals that can alter our metabolism in ways that lead to weight gain, resistant weight loss, right? We have people who have a hard time losing those like last 10 or 20 pounds, or even 5 pounds, insulin resistance, which can lead to diabetes itself, and then obesity. And so, and within that bubble of looking at obesogens, there's a number of different sort of, methods or modes of action within the body that can trigger weight gain. So in some instances, it's the same as with pharmaceuticals. It's activation of PPAR. So some of these chemicals can activate PPAR and cause weight gain on that cellular level. And what's fascinating about the activation of PPAR is that is weight gain that's happening on a cellular level that has nothing to do with food or exercise. It's nothing to do with food or exercise. It's literally happening within the context of our fat cells. And so this is where I kind of lean on the look, diet and exercise is important, but it's not the only thing, right? Yeah. Because we can still be vulnerable to the effects of, or to weight gain, if we're consistently being exposed to these chemicals, which we are.
Yeah, and I think that people who listen to this podcast, they're pretty informed, but most people out there who are not at all informed, I think they feel like they're gaining weight, they're overweight, and they just are like, I guess it's just me, I guess it's just bad luck, or, this is what
just in my genes, right? So that's another one, like it's a genetic, and in some cases it is, right? So it is genetic because when we have exposure to certain chemicals that cause a change within the body in the way that we, for example, respond to insulin or the programming of our fat cells, which is what PPAR does. Some of that we can pass on to future generations, right? These are what are referred to as epigenetic changes. And there's a lot of chemicals that can affect the epigenome, and lots of things can affect the epigenome. So stress and life experiences and sleep and nutrition. So the epigenome is, the analogy is that your DNA, which is generally speaking fixed, so your DNA doesn't change. That's sort of like the hardware. It's like your monitor and your keyboard on your computer, and your epigenome is like the software. So it tells the system what to do, and your epigenome is quite malleable. So you can have in your genetic predisposition, you can be predisposed to certain diseases or health issues. But that doesn't necessarily mean those genes will be expressed. So having cancer in your family doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get cancer. Having overweight parents doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to also be overweight. But we have the ability to determine or change, not determine, but we have the ability to affect how those genes get expressed. And so there's an expression within this realm that says your genetics loads the gun and your environment pulls the trigger. So your genetics is loading the gun, but you have the ability through making, we all have the ability through making healthy lifestyle choices. I mean, don't smoke, eat healthy foods, get outside in nature, exercise, meditate, remove toxins, of course, get enough sleep. All of the things that we sort of universally recognize as being healthy are all things that can help take our finger off the trigger of the expression of those conditions. And so weight is one of those things where we can pass on to our children a predisposition to gain weight. So this is, I think, a big reason why we're seeing such a large increase in rates of overweight and obesity within children. So the rates of obesity, I don't know if it's overweight in particular or overweight and obesity in children, has increased by like 30%, I think, since 1970. So it's a huge increase in the amount of chronic health issues that young children are experiencing, toddlers, right, who are active because they're toddlers, right? They're running around. So we can't say, oh, it's exercise, right? Because they move around more than anybody. If you ever try keeping up with a toddler, they're exhausting, right? So they're constantly moving. So we can't say, oh, well, they're lazy and they're not exercising and that's why they're overweight, right? They've inherited some of this from their family.
Yeah, that's one of the saddest things to see. There's I won't get too specific, but there's a little girl in my son's school that, she's his age, like 9, and so obese, at 9. And she's also, I think, Native American. So we kind of screwed up their genes by introducing
we certainly did
everything into their diet. And I just feel so badly for not that weight defines us. We can get into that whole thing, but to start out in life so obese.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Years ago, before I started doing this work, I lived in New York City and I worked as a nanny, and the family that I nannied for, were all a little bit overweight. Some family members more than other, and the young daughter was very overweight. And it was really hard to watch her grow up from she was 6 years old when I started to nanny, and now she's in high school, but it's something that she's had to deal with her whole life. And it was really sad, and it was really hard to watch a young kid go through that unnecessarily. And I think that there's the diet mantra is so fully ingrained in our culture, right? It's I just need to exercise more. I just need to get back on Weight Watchers again. I just need to eat less chocolate, whatever it is, right? So we're always leaning towards if I just do this, meaning we're expecting there to be a single thing that we can do that can change everything. And it's never that way. It's a complex web of things that are all interacting with each other. And we can't expect to solve the problem by only exploring one or two of the threads of that web, so to speak.
Yeah. I was just interviewed on a weight loss summit, and it was kind of about the broader topic of weight loss and all the emotional factors and lots of different things. But I do think one way to reduce toxic load is food quality. We can get into some other ones, but a lot of people don't still really see the value of buying organic. It just seems more overpriced and some kind of, that's just what,
it's like a hipster fad, or it's like an elitist thing.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you're eating, I don't know if this classifies as obesogens or not, but if you're eating food that was sprayed with Roundup that is messing up your gut bacteria, that can also make you gain weight. So just taking out GMO foods, could really help. Or and Roundup is sprayed on other things too. So I think just within your budget, reducing that.
Well, I think that, I mean, absolutely. And so there are pesticides that are classified as obesogens, right? So atrazine, for example, is one of those chemicals. Atrazine is an herbicide. It's one of the most widely used herbicides in the United States. And I think it's about 94% of drinking water tested by the USDA, I think it was who did that test, found atrazine in 94% of drinking water. So, you know, these are herbicides that are sprayed on golf courses, on agricultural crops, and they run off into the waterway, and our water systems don't filter them out. And even though the levels of these chemicals are so small, like it's a tiny amount of chemical in our drinking water, that amount is still enough for us to trigger some of these metabolic changes or health effects. And, you know, we know that because, you know, pharmaceutical drugs are also designed and delivered into the body in extraordinarily small doses, right? At parts per million, parts per billion levels. And that's how they're designed, because the field of pharmacology recognizes that very low doses can have a very large impact. So when we're looking at pharmaceuticals, things like birth control, NuvaRing is one of the most popular methods of birth control. I actually don't even know if that still is the case, but it certainly was a number of years ago. And that delivers it's delivering a dose of whatever is the sort of combination of drugs within that product at extraordinarily low levels. I believe that the dosage for something like NuvaRing is 0.035 parts per million. So it's an extremely small amount, and it's very effective. It's like 98, 99% effective, and they often have side effects. So we fully recognize, the field of pharmacology and everyone who takes pharmaceuticals, that these tiny doses that we're being exposed to do actually matter, because the body is designed to respond to really tiny levels of exposure to things, right?
Hormones.
Yeah, hormones in the body. And so, you know, when we're looking at things like pesticides and atrazine in our drinking water, or other organophosphate pesticides that are sprayed on our crops, it's about reducing, choosing organic is about reducing exposure to pesticides. It's not about higher nutrient quality, even though that is the case for a lot of crops, is that the organically grown crops have greater levels of some of the sort of micro and macronutrients. But the real reason is because we want to avoid exposure to these pesticides that not only can trigger weight gain, but they can lead to, birth defects, hormonal issues, cancer, thyroid disorders, neurological issues like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Like, there's this massive laundry list of chemicals or effects from exposure to these chemicals, these pesticides. And so regardless of whether or not our motivation is to cut some weight off our bod, if we take these chemicals out, we're also reducing our exposure to chemicals that can affect us in other ways. Yeah. So there's not ever one reason to take it out, or if you're just using one reason, fine, but know that there's fringe benefit in lots of other aspects of health.
Yeah. I think it's an important one to just drill in. So let's take it a step further. Let's say somebody is doing their best to eat organic. They have switched their Tupperwares to glass, perhaps. Maybe they use some more natural cleaning products, but they aren't maybe super informed, because there's so much to know about toxicity, so much to learn. What are some, you probably meet a lot of these people, these women and men. So what are some things that you say is like the next step to look for and remove?
Well, I think, first of all, that unfortunately most people have not yet moved away from plastics and personal care products. I think that in our bubble, right? In
Yeah.
the health and wellness space, more and more people are doing that. But I think on the whole, it's still not happening on a broad enough scale.
No, I agree.
So, what happens often is if people are on a health journey, it's usually because they have a health challenge, and then they do something to start, educating themselves, or they'll go one of two routes. They'll go to their doctor, and their doctor will say, oh, take this pharmaceutical, you'll be fine. Or you're just tired, you're fine. And then they're going to go, oh, okay, guess I'm just tired, and they'll live with their symptoms. Or they're going to start kind of digging around on their own and figuring out what might be happening in their health. And so that's sort of that more consumer who's done the work to educate themselves. And so typically when somebody's on this health journey, the first place they start is with their food, because that's logical. Like, that's where I would start. And so they've started to clean up their diet, and a lot of times they've done an excellent job. Maybe they're eating paleo, maybe they are eating organic, but they often are so segmented in their thinking merely because they just haven't had the opportunity to have somebody make the connection for them. They haven't yet turned their attention to the the non-food items in their home. So I've talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of people who are like, yes, I eat super healthy. It never dawned on me to look at my skincare.
It's true. It's true. And I said that on the weight loss summit. It's like, there's always more. Like, for me, the makeup I use was told to me by the spa I go to. It has coconut oil in it, and it's non-toxic. And, I can tell it's different. Have I ever researched to make sure? No, I just realized that recently. And it's true that some companies or some, estheticians are like, oh no, I learned about this company, it's all good. I can't take that at face value.
No, of course not. And I think it's sad that we can't. So that's sort of like a symptom of a much bigger problem. But getting back to your question of like, what do we do? I think it helps to understand a little bit, like that activation of PPAR is just one of the ways that chemicals can make us fat. So let's look at some of the other ways, and that way it'll sort of make sense why we're telling people to stop using plastics and stop with the perfumes and the scented candles and the Febreze and stuff like that. So activation of PPAR is certainly one of the ways that chemicals can trigger weight gain. And I just want to be, when I say chemicals, I just want people to recognize that we're talking about the chemicals that can trigger these health issues. Not all chemicals are bad. Water is a chemical, air is a chemical, we're chemicals. So we don't want to be in one of those conversations where, oh, well, all chemicals are bad. No, not all chemicals are bad. Bad ones are bad, and the other ones are fine. And so that often comes up as what are we supposed to do? Avoid all chemicals. Even water is a chemical. Well, we don't need to avoid that one, because that one's not going to be harmful to us in the same way that these chemicals can be. So activation of PPAR is one of the ways. Another way is through the disruption of our hormones. So a lot of the chemicals that we're exposed to, pesticides, the chemicals that migrate out of plastics, the chemicals that are found in fragranced items like Febreze and scented candles and dish soap and shampoo, the flame retardants that are found in our sofas and carpeting, and our non-stick chemicals that are found in cookware and grease-proof paper, and our, outdoor gear, which is the saddest for me because I'm a outdoorsy person. So I like to camp and hike and backpack, and all that gear has got flame retardant, non-stick perfluorinated chemicals on them, which is a real problem. And so many of those chemicals have the ability to block or mimic hormones in our bodies. And so because our endocrine system is sort of this master regulator of all of the hormones in our body that are responsible for everything, including metabolism, including mood, including energy, including digestion, right? All of the things. These chemicals that can alter our hormonal balance are known as endocrine disrupting chemicals, because they're able to disrupt our endocrine system. And oftentimes chemicals that can do that can result in alterations in the metabolic process. So it can lead to things like insulin resistance, which in and of itself can lead to weight gain. It can lead to all other alterations in our metabolism where we're more predisposed to gain weight, and then to do so at a faster and faster rate. Sometimes these chemicals can change, and one's pretty interesting, change our metabolism so that we sort of process our fats and sugars differently. So for example, somebody, in rodent studies, they do this a lot where they'll, expose rodents to a certain chemical and then change the rodent's diet and see how alterations in diet have an effect now that the rodent has been exposed to this chemical. And so some of these obesogenic chemicals have shown to, you can expose a rat one time and then switch the rat's diet from a normal diet to a high-fat diet. And that rat will put on way more weight than his buddy over in the next tank over that is also eating the high-fat diet but wasn't exposed. And so again, that's weight gain happening on that cellular level. So we have hormone disruption as one of the other mechanisms of triggering weight gain and weight issues. Then we also have what you talked about earlier, which you mentioned earlier, is that a lot of the chemicals that we're exposed to are fat soluble. They're known as lipophilic chemicals, and they migrate into and hide out in our body's fat stores, in our adipose tissue. And that's actually a defense mechanism employed by the body to stop those toxins from freely circulating through our bloodstream and reaching target organs, whether it's the brain or the heart or muscle tissue or bone tissue or any of our liver, kidneys, etc. So it stores these fat soluble toxins inside our fat tissue. And while that's great from a protective mechanism, what happens is if you have a lot of these extra chemicals floating around and you don't have enough fat to store them in, your body's going to go, ooh, well, it looks like we need to start packing on some more pounds because I need a place to safely store this stuff.
Okay.
And so that in and of itself can also lead to weight gain. And one of the things that's really interesting, and we can see the sort of unraveling of that story when we look at people who have undergone gastric bypass or had lap band surgery, right? These are people that are very obese. They have a tremendous amount of fat on their body. And suddenly they've gone through this operation that's caused a dramatic reduction in the amount of calories they can take in. So the result is they have very fast weight loss. And what happens to those people is they very often get sick. They just turn pasty white, their hair falls out, they just end up, getting every cold that passes through. And part of that is because all of those toxins that were living within their fat stores are now flooding the system, right? Because they're being broken down, that fat is being broken down, and those toxins that were hiding out there are now flooding into the body, and the liver is having a very hard, liver can't keep up.
Yeah.
And so we end up being sick from internal exposure to toxins. And so that's just an example of sort of when we clean the system out, we have to do it slowly and carefully and not in that really aggressive manner. But that's just an illustrative of how when we lose weight quickly, those toxins that were stored in our fat flood our system and can make us sick.
Okay. So those are 3 ways. Are there more?
There's probably some more, but those are sort of the primary ways. So,
okay.
I think that when we can understand that it's not just chemicals can make us fat. Here's how chemicals can make us fat. It gives us more of a motivation to start making changes. It's sort of what we don't want is it to fall into the oh my God, it's so bad for me thing that we always do. Like when we're digging into that
guilt and
second
stuff.
piece of chocolate cake and we're like, oh my God, it's so bad for me. Right? it becomes easy to dismiss it if we don't have enough real information about why it's bad.
Yeah, that's what I really love about what you do. Like earlier we talked about pharmaceuticals and I was like, why? Like I need to know why. It's just, I'm not even on any pharmaceuticals, but I just need to understand it. And the more I understand, like the better choices I make. And with the toxins conversation, it's really hard to be perfect. You go slowly, chip away at it. I mean, I'm in a new home in a place with, I did run my water report, but I still don't fully understand.
All right.
You know what? We don't have a great filtration system yet. We're using our little filter on the fridge, and that's just all I have the bandwidth for
Yep.
now.
I mean, look, I've been doing this now for 6.5 years, researching 7 years researching this stuff. And I'm only now getting a new mattress. My mattress is like 16 years old. So it's not like we don't make all of these changes overnight, and we can't change everything. So my sort of motto is let's change the things that we can control, so we worry less about the ones that we can't, because there's a lot that we can't worry about. And so if we can focus our attention on where we start taking action, and this will go back to what are the specific things that we can do, let's focus our attention there. So the first thing that I would say is, start incorporating more organic food per our conversation. And you can use the Environmental Working Group's Dirty Dozen, Clean 15 list as a reference. Because what that list will do is sort of help you prioritize your budget of what are the things that are really important to spend on organic. And the Dirty Dozen list are the 12 fruits and vegetables that have the highest residues of pesticides. And so if you only buy organic versions of those, you're still having a huge impact. And what's fascinating and amazing and sort of reassuring in this conversation is that our body does actually have the ability to process out and metabolize and excrete many of these chemicals if we give the body the chance. But the problem is that because we're being exposed every single day, we're not actually giving the body a chance to do that. So it's like a bucket that has a hole in the bottom, and we're filling it faster than the bucket can drain. And so until we can change the amount of water, let's say, that's flowing into the bucket's never going to have the opportunity to drain, and that's actually what we're aiming for. And so an example of what happens when we stop filling the bucket and allowing the body to drain is within this conversation of pesticides. So there have been a number of studies that that question what happens to the circulating pesticide levels in people when they switch from a conventional diet to a mostly organic diet, not even 100%, because that's really hard. And what these studies found is that you can reduce, just by eating a mostly organic diet, you can drop the level of circulating pesticides in your body by 80 to 90% within 3 to 5 days. That's all it takes. That's all it takes. And so, that's a really powerful statistic or bit of information, info nugget for somebody who's like not really sure it's actually doing anything. It is doing something, and we just have to give our body a chance to let this stuff go. So that's sort of my number one, is ditch it with the pesticides, opt for organic whenever possible, with an emphasis on the Dirty Dozen list. The number two thing I would say is start phasing out plastics in your home. And it's not just in the kitchen, and it's not just the food storage containers. It's the plastic spatulas, it's the pasta strainers, it's the mixing bowls, it's the stuff that you put in the microwave, it's the little kids' plastic drinking glasses, because parents are often afraid to give their kids glass because they don't want to throw them on the floor and have them break. And so what they're using plastic, and a lot of these plastics, most plastics, leach chemicals that are synthetic estrogens. So these are the chemicals that are endocrine disrupting. They can lead to weight gain. They can lead to lots of other symptoms as well. And so phasing out the use of those items in the kitchen, I think, is number two. And it's a step-by-step process, right? If somebody, I get pictures all the time after people go through my class, and they'll like send me a picture of the pile of plastic containers that they're like, I'm throwing all of this out. And I'm like, yes. But they feel after they learn about this stuff, they're like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to clean this stuff out. I'm going to get new stuff. Doesn't have to be super expensive. Target, Walmart, Kmart, all these stores. I don't even know if Kmart still exists.
Goodwill. You can get
Goodwill even. Yeah. I mean, you can find, and if you're, super budget strapped, buy a pickle jar or peanut butter or sauerkraut or whatever in a glass jar, pasta sauce in a glass jar, and then run it through the dishwasher. And now you have a glass container. So that's what I used to do when I first got started. Like, I didn't have any money to go out and buy all this stuff. So I just reused what I had. So that's number 2. Number 3 would be to really take a close look at the fragrances in our home. We overlook these a lot. There are chemicals within the fragrance mixture that are synthetic estrogens, and they're called phthalates. And phthalates are one of those chemicals that's classified as an obesogen. And so, anytime that we are breathing in or smelling the candles or the air freshener, the plug-in or the Febreze or our laundry detergent or our dish soap or our shampoo or our makeup, and it smells like something, there's a very high chance that those chemicals, those products include phthalates. And so we want to sort of start systematically getting rid of those. And the lowest hanging fruit ones are the scented candles and the air fresheners, because they're not actually doing anything other than just polluting the air inside your home. So those are just like an easy throw out. Like, you don't need to Febreze your couch. You don't.
Yeah, you talk about opening the window, using baking soda, using essential oils. There's lots of other ways to do it. I'm like a fragrance Nazi now, like, since I've learned this from you. And it's amazing how many natural products still contain synthetic fragrance, like so many. It might be the only ingredient in there that's questionable, but I will put that right back on the shelf.
Yeah, and I think that, that's the shortcut for people, because phthalates as an ingredient is never going to be listed on a product label. What is going to be listed is the word fragrance, or sometimes it's written out as perfume or parfum. And if you see that word on an ingredient label, that's a very good indication that phthalates are going to be present there. And the products that are in the, more natural space that don't use those type of synthetic materials will tell you which plant-based essential oils are part of the fragrance that they use.
Yeah.
Lavender, rose, like whatever it is that their fragrance mixture is, they'll tell you. And that's what we want. What we want is transparency in this space. And so, those synthetic fragrances are so pervasive. A lot of people have immediate reactions when they're exposed to those things. They can have allergic reactions, asthmatic reactions. They can get hives, breakouts, headaches, migraines. Like, that's pretty common for people to say, I can't even walk down the aisle at the cleaning aisle at the grocery store because I get a ripping headache.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that's your body having a very acute reaction. But, one of the things, and I think that it's a good way to sort of talk about toxins or toxicants or chemicals in our products, is that a lot of times when we hear that word toxic, we're assuming it's the kind of toxic that's going to require a phone call to like poison control, right? Like a trip to the emergency room, like, oh, my skin's falling off, my hair's falling out. Most of the chemicals that we're exposed to every day aren't toxic in that way. It's far more insidious. It's a long game, right, with these chemicals that we're being exposed to. In some instances, yes, you can have an acute reaction. That's a headache, nausea, and other immediate symptoms from exposure. But most of the time it's happening on this really subtle level that's tweaking our hormones in just subtle enough way that can increase our likelihood of gaining weight, or that can increase our likelihood for breast cancer, or increase the likelihood that our children are going to have developmental disorders. And that's the bigger issue with a lot of these chemicals. And so we want to phase them out for all those reasons. So organic food, ditch the plastics, ditch the fragrances in your home as much as possible. If I were to continue that, I would say, what we're always looking for, what are the easiest, lowest hanging fruits. If you can get your water properly filtered, that's a really big one, because we have pesticides, we have pharmaceuticals, we have other chemicals that are in our drinking water, some of which fall into this category of obesogens. If you have fluoride in your drinking water, fluoride is a thyroid suppressant. So that alters your thyroid levels, which that in and of itself can lead to weight gain, right? In addition to a lot of other symptoms related to thyroid disorders. So, filtering your water is really important. There is no one size fits all water filter. This is the hardest part of this conversation, is because there's not like a product that I can tell people to go out and buy, because everyone's water is a little bit different. But there's certainly resources online, and I'm going to have a course coming soon that's specifically on water. It's not ready yet, because it's a question that I get asked all the time. It's like, what filter do I get? I think you asked me that question once.
I did, because of course I hadn't listened to the lesson yet.
I was like, girl, go listen to the class.
I had a Berkey filter, and I was asking you if that was good, which I do think I think
these are great.
But like you said, it's just one type of filtration. It's a carbon-based filtration, so it's not.
They have a couple different types of filter. So they have like a fluoride filter, and they've got a couple different cartridges.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work for everybody, because it's so the big Berkey is a big stainless steel container that sits on your countertop, and you pour regular water in, and it's a gravity fed system with a spigot on the bottom, so you can just kind of pour the filtered water out from the bottom. But that doesn't work for everybody. I mean, when I lived in New York City, I wanted one of those, but my kitchen counter was literally 24 square inches, and that was all I had. So
yeah, now I still have my Berkey. I should actually sell it, but now we're in Phoenix, and we drink water constantly, and we want it cold, and there's no way I'm like filling that Berkey 25 times. Not that I have to fill, but it's just not convenient anymore. And I think we need better filtration than we needed in Portland. So it's a bigger conversation, and we don't want to stress people out. You and I know a lot about health, and you know a ton about toxins. We're not stressing out about it. Like, it's just knowledge. It's just learning. It's just self-improvement, improvement of your health environment. It's just chipping away at it. And like my husband asked for some bathroom spray the other day, and I couldn't find one in the store I was satisfied with, so I didn't buy any. So there was
make one.
Yeah, that I was like, I'll just make one. Okay, so, but the water filter thing for me, I'm like, that's just a big project, and I can't get to it. So there's places where I'm like, I'm not compromising. I'm not just going to go ahead and buy this fragrance thing. And there's places where I am compromising, because I just don't have time to put in that big project.
And I think that, what that example of the organic food, organic diet studies show is that we don't have to be perfect in order to have a big impact.
True.
So those small changes that we make can actually have a big impact on our exposures and the effects of those exposures. So I definitely have had, clients that have come through my classes, even people that are, primarily health practitioners, so health coaches, nutritionists, et cetera, who have said that, once they, after years of trying to lose their own weight, it wasn't until they really cleaned up their home environment that they saw the needle shift, the needle move on their weight. And so, and it doesn't happen overnight. Like I tell people, like, no, switching your shampoo isn't going to mean that like you're going to lose 30 pounds this month. But if you can take out all of these exposures, or as many of them as possible, even if it's not 100%, even if it's 40%, 50%, it's still a big enough reduction that it can have a meaningful impact on what's happening within the body on that sort of cellular level. It can allow people to release some of that weight. So if we're removing the barriers to weight loss, which is what we're doing when we're reducing these exposures, it makes the work that we're doing in the diet realm and the exercise realm, in getting proper sleep, because that's another huge one within the weight conversation. It makes all of those efforts more powerful if we're removing these sort of silent barriers to weight loss.
Yeah, I agree. And as a coach who works with women with hormone disorders, thyroid problems can get in the way of weight. Female hormones can get in the way of weight. And these toxins affect those hormones and how they
Yeah.
perform. So, yeah, if you have a thyroid problem and you're getting exposed to fluoride and heavy metals and different chemicals, it's going to affect your thyroid performance. So, just another way to tie it in to just kind of get the junk out of the system, lets the system communicate better, work better. And not only weight, we focused on weight today, but, better sleep, less anxiety, that kind of a thing.
Oh, yeah. And what I like about the changes in this space is that, once you clear the plastics out of your kitchen and you got new glass containers, like you kind of don't have to think about it anymore, right? Like once you've finished and sort of cleaned all that stuff out, then it's not like that sort of constant battle with like, oh, there's a piece of chocolate. I really want a chocolate. I know I shouldn't. Like there's not an emotional, psychological tie in the same way that there is often with food.
Yeah, it's just what you stir your sauce with just kind of doesn't matter. You need just something to stir it. So if you switch to a wooden spoon,
like
it's
great.
Nothing. Yeah, no.
Yeah, you're not like agonizing over like, oh, should I? Shouldn't I? How is this going to impact my life? Just make the switch. It's like not something that you have to think about anymore. And like the reality is that that's often the thing that overwhelms us the most is there's so much stuff to think about. Well, let's start chipping away at that list by being proactive and taking action. I mean, I've had a number of my clients come back to me and say, the thing that I love the most is when it's done. And I just feel really good. Like going into my kitchen and knowing, boom, there's nothing in here that I know is going to undermine any of my efforts to achieve optimum health. And that in and of itself feels excellent. It's like this little cloud that, especially as people have more awareness, there's like this little cloud that kind of comes creeping over your head, right? That's like, it's all stuff I have to do. And so if you can kind of start pulling that apart, then that cloud dissipates. You don't have to worry about it anymore. So, people ask me often because I'm so steeped in this conversation, they ask me all the time, like, God, how do you like live in the world knowing all this stuff? And I say, well, I live in it just fine because I know that in my home, I've done the best that I can and, and continue to make changes. Like I said, I'm only now just getting a new bed. Continue to make the changes. And so I don't really worry about what's in my home because I've taken care of it. And it's been, a 6 or 7 year process. And I've gotten to a point where like, I'm good. Like, do I think about toxins out in the world? Absolutely. When I encounter them. Do I think about it every time I go to a restaurant and I have leftovers and they give me a plastic container to put my hot food in? Like, yeah, I think about that. And then I go home and I put it in a glass container and I solve the problem. Or yeah. So, there's in Portland, there's a place that I go that makes really excellent broth. And you can buy it by the quart. And whenever it's like where I go when I'm sick and I need some broth and I don't want to have to cook anything. And I'll just show up with my quart mason jars and say, fill these instead of the quart plastic container. And that's like a super simple, they don't care. They're like, cool. We just saved a penny on having to,
Yeah, they were going to pour it into something.
And in fact, they actually give it like a 50-cent discount or something if you bring your own container. So great, cool.
Oh, nice. Is that Broth Bar?
No, it's Nong's.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one.
Oh, it's Nong-Khao Mangai. It's an incredibly good chicken and rice place.
Oh,
their broth is like unbelievably delicious.
Stop it right now. It's so good. Okay, I have to go there when I come back to Portland.
Yes, when you come back to Portland, we will go there. Okay. But yeah, that's like when I'm sick, Nong's, quarts and quarts of Nong's.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've definitely filtered in some little, no pun intended, little bits about advanced things or things to think about when you're out. And I so much appreciate that you made the connection and how it happens and why it happens and little things to look for in the label. It's so great. I neglected to mention when we started sort of about you. Obviously, from this conversation, you're a huge toxins expert. Yeah. But I'll give this nutshell and you can add on that you were a trained health coach. You found that some of your clients were weight resistant. You dug into this toxins conversation and ended up kind of switching gears to train mostly practitioners in toxins, although you do have, it sounds like you're developing some more programs for the public. So yeah, I've bought some of your products. I've taken one of your courses. I literally can't recommend it enough. I'm so glad you're doing the research for me because I have the questions, but I don't, take the time or know where to research to get the answer. And you just give it to me, which is phenomenal. It's honestly, I'm going to gush a bit. Like, this is a tremendous service to our community because nobody's doing that deep research into toxins, and it's really an important piece for our planet, for our health, for our health of our children we mentioned. So yeah, thank you so much. And let's hear about what resources you can share with those listening.
Yeah, so, and thank you. And I love having you as a student. So as I like to call us, it's the nerd herd is what I call all of us internally. So people can just hop over to my website, which is just laraadler.com, LARAADLER.com. I'm on Instagram as the Environmental Toxins Nerd. I am on Facebook and Twitter. And if people want to dive into some of this content and learn more of the specifics on cookware and food packaging and personal care products and things like that, I do have a excellent course that I've had over 2,000 people go through in the last couple of years called Tools for Teaching Toxicity. And the URL, if you want to check out that course, is just teachingtoxicity.com. And I also have a really great guide PDF that talks into a lot of what we talked about today, which is a chemicals, not calories guide of understanding obesogens that, will if you digest information better by reading, and want to sort of cut to the chase to some of these action steps, then definitely check out that guide. And I think, Bridget, you'll put the link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, so that's sort of Lara's free gift to you. And yeah, we'll make a link out of it so you can go to the show notes or the blog notes to get that. So yeah, some people want to kind of see it in writing, and we do give some links. We'll definitely give some links on the show notes, but we don't give every single little detail.
Because that's a ton of notes. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lara. We definitely want to keep in touch and just keep spreading your message. And yeah, I just want to encourage listeners and viewers, like, we do want you to implement, and don't let it be stressful. Honestly, I feel like a lot of the stress just comes from planning and just feeling of overwhelm. Yeah. So if you can make a little mental plan about how you're going to approach some of these changes, maybe every time you run out of a product, you'll make a better choice when you buy a new one, or every time you go to Target, which is for me often, that you'll browse for one new glass Tupperware or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, one of my sort of guiding principles of doing this work is action, not overwhelm.
Yeah.
Action, not overwhelm.
Great. Well, thanks, Lara, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you next week.